join.
Sounds good.
All right, people are starting to join, so I think we can get started.
Sounds good. So today we're going to be talking about reference letters. I know a lot of people have reference letter questions when they come in for consultations. Also, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, the reference letters are surprisingly difficult and so many questions come up during the way, or I should say along the way. It's the end of the day here. But reference letters tend to be trickier, I think, than they should be for a lot of people. So we can first go over the types of reference letters. Everyone has questions about who should I be asking, who can sign for me, what do they need to do to sign, do they need letterhead, do they need permission, all of these different things. The types of people that sign your reference letters do matter. You can have a lineup, like you say, you could submit 5 letters that are all from your employing company, just from different people at that company, and it's just not going to have as much impact as if you have a solid lineup with a good deal of variety. To get that variety and to get the voices that I think are important for USCIS, the ones that they preference, I usually recommend 3 core references. And this is true across all case types for individual or talent immigration. This is true for EB-1A, EB-1B, O-1, NIW, sometimes even like special case EB-1C, that type thing. The types of reference letters are, number 1, a letter from your current company. And this should be talking about the critical work that you are doing currently. Sometimes it should be more future focused, like if you are doing an NIW or even an O-1. Sometimes it needs to be focused more on what you've accomplished so far, like with the EB-1A or the EB-1B. But regardless, you do want a letter from your current company. I'll get into what you do if that's not possible, but this is a typical type that I look for. The second type is the academic letter. USCIS does tend to preference academics. Whenever it's adjudicating these talent applications, it does have in its mind, I think as a default, the academic profile. And so academic letters do go over well. And that's not to say you always need one. I've certainly submitted all kinds of cases, EB-1A, not EB-1B, you need an academic for EB-1B, but EB-1A, O-1, NIW without the academic voice. And they still go through, but I do think that they add a lot of value to the case. And so I highly recommend pushing for an academic letter from a highly qualified professor with a good publication and research record. This person should be commenting on the general state of the field and your position in it. The third type of letter is the independent letter. And again, this is not always required, but it is recommended, and it is actually something that USCIS asks for in a lot of RFEs. The independent letter should be from someone who has not worked with you directly in the past. So not worked at the same organization at the same time as you, not collaborated on research or been a co-author or anything like that, but a truly independent reference. This doesn't mean that you can't know them at all. In fact, most independent references you do need to have some connection to. Normally I recommend that this is someone that you perhaps met at a conference or who maybe published in the same journal as you an article on an interesting topic and you reached out to say, great work on this, something like that. But they should not have worked with you in the past. USCIS values all 3 kinds of letters, and so all 3 are typical, and I usually tell people to plan to get all 3. And then for some cases, you may only need the 3. Like I file a lot of NIW cases with just those 3, and I have filed some O1s and some EB-1Bs with just 3 as well. But for most EB-1A cases and for some other cases, I will often do a lineup of 5 or 6 letters. And this is generally because you need additional voices or perspectives in the profile. Some additional letters might just come from your colleagues or from people who work at competitor companies or from former clients, all talking about the work that you do and its impact in the field. Those can be valuable perspectives and additions to the file. Some of them are more targeted, like for EB-1A reference letters, the additional letters outside of that core set might focus on a particular criteria. I will draft letters occasionally where the person is only talking about a prestigious membership, or the person is only talking about a prestigious judge role the person has done. And so these letters can be in slightly different format or tone, but they still add to the overall profile. They provide a unique perspective, and they're valuable for USCIS. I don't think you need a lot of references all saying the same thing. That gets boring, and USCIS kind of knows it. Each reference should talk about something unique with the profile. They do need to have their own perspective. So just remember the types of letters, the 3 core letters: employer letter, independent letter, and academic letter. And then you may want some additional letters just giving added perspective. I do want to just touch on what happens if you can't get letters, because I'm in the middle of that right now with a lot of my clients. And honestly, it's the clients that you never would have expected. Employer letters first. So sometimes your employer will not issue you a letter if you are going through your own talent process and not using their attorneys in their processes. And they do have the right to control their letterhead. So you really shouldn't be trying to bypass the process to get a letter on letterhead if the company has policies that prohibit that. You should work within the systems that are presented to you. Don't try to push it if it's reasonably not a good policy. But you can have your manager issue a letter on personal letterhead or in personal capacity. Not all of them will do it because the companies try to convince managers that the companies are in control of the manager's personal letterhead too, which in my opinion is not accurate according to most employment agreements, but I am also not an employment lawyer, and so your manager, has to work this out for themselves. It's something they either need to talk to their own legal counsel about, or they need to just be comfortable in their own mind. So again, don't push it, but you can ask that they do it in personal capacity. I have worked with clients whose companies and whose managers don't want to do any of it. And it doesn't matter how much the employee deserves it. It doesn't matter how objective the statements are in the letter. They just won't provide a letter at all. So if that's you in that case, I recommend looking for someone who was working at the company with you who has since departed, because they can still talk about your work and your time at the company, even though it's not going to be from someone who's currently working there. There are workarounds, workarounds to the workarounds if you need, but generally most people will be able to get letters that talk about their current employment if they follow that kind of progression. So company letterhead is preferred. If not, you want your manager in personal capacity. If not, you want a former manager or someone who worked at the company to attest to your work. For the academic letter, a good source is usually your alma mater. So that could be the school you most recently went to. It could also be your bachelor's degree school if you keep in contact with the professors there more often. Sometimes it is nice if your department head would be able to or willing to issue the letter. Sometimes they're not really willing to do that. And I've encountered increasingly more and more situations where professors are not willing to state their opinion. Like, they are willing to say what you learned in class, and they're willing to say what the school program provides, but they're not willing to say that they believe that this work is in the national interest or something like that. And I don't really get it. They all say the same thing, that they don't want the legal liability. And I guess it's legal liability if they're giving their opinion and they don't actually believe it, although no one's going to come after them for that. Like, we're not asking professors to sign off on something that they don't believe in. They should be able to pass and just say no. But I'm surprised at how many professors I've encountered recently who are unwilling to state an opinion. They only want to state facts, and that's all. If you encounter these professors, just know that the factual letters are not what we're after. They don't add value to the record. Like, nobody cares what you learned in their class or what the school program is. What USCIS cares about is the professor's opinion on the state of the field or the industry and on your work within it. So if you are encountering a professor who's not willing to sign off on that, you should network and you should try and get a different professor who is more willing to work with you, actually look at your profile, actually look at the state of things and do some analysis. A lot of professors are amenable to signing these, so don't let this freak you out. I just noticed a recent trend with it, and it distresses me because either they're being disingenuous or they really don't understand what legal liability is. Because no one can be sued for stating a true opinion that they themselves truly believe and truly hold. And you should state such things, in my opinion. If you believe something, you should stand by it and state it. So I digress on that point. I guess don't be too hard on your professors. They don't really know what immigration is or what the requirements are. But you may need to network more broadly. You can't just count on the professor you ask first being the one to sign your letter. Independent references actually tend to be really amenable to signing, which is interesting. They are the letters that I would think are the hardest to get. But if you are working in the same general industry as someone and if you have a good reputation, people are actually pretty willing to support you. So I found that these letters are actually pretty easy to get. Keep in mind that you do need to reach for qualifications. So you do need to be asking people who are more advanced than you, who may have a better reputation than you, or leaders in their field. Even if you're in EB-1A and applying in the top category, getting people with higher level credentials than you is sometimes important. So don't be afraid to network your way up. If you don't know anyone with top credentials, but say you're applying for an NIW, ask your manager if they have someone they can introduce you to. Leverage your connections in membership organizations and see if you can do some kind of informational interview or something with somebody. If you are in academia or if you are close with your professors, you can ask them for introductions to industry contacts. And again, just network your way through it. People will tell me all the time that they can't get an independent reference. And just think about what that means to USCIS. Like if you were to tell USCIS that you can't get an independent reference, but you're applying for EB-1A, USCIS would automatically say, well, you don't have a claim in your field because other people need to know about you and know about your work and recognize that you are at the top in order for you to get that qualification or get that credential. So, I do understand that a lot of people talk mainly with other leaders in their own company, maybe with just a couple of other people that they work closely with, especially technical experts. Like I know that a lot of you are not out there and big on networking. But once you are at a certain level, you can network out. Even though it takes effort and is scary, it's something that gives you good results. And it almost always gives good results right away. As long as there is backing to your career and to your credentials. All right. I guess that's the general summary. We can go ahead and open it up to questions. I'm sure that people will have interesting questions on this topic.
Suzy Roger says, hi, Bo, thanks for the webinars and guidance.
You are welcome.
Sujay asks, generally speaking, would 8 out of 10 reference letters be good enough from number of letters standpoint?
There are different theories and philosophies on letters. I usually think 8 to 10 is overkill. I know some attorneys will do that many. I think most do not. I think most are in line with what I do, which is 5 to 6. It does seem to be somewhat of an industry standard, although it's not consistent across the board. There are a lot of attorneys who really abide by the principle that less is more. And so they will do maybe 1, 2, or 3 very detailed letters, and that's all that they will submit. I personally think that the 3 perspectives are pretty core to most cases. And so if you're looking for general guidance, that's what you should go for. But if you're working with an attorney and they have a very specific angle on your case and they only want to do 1 or 2 letters, it's not necessarily a bad idea. Simplifying the case and really focusing it can be strong and it can be effective. The only case where I've done 10 letters is a case where we had to really rely on letters because there just was not much outside objective evidence. But we got really top testimonials in that case from people who were obviously the leading people in the field. We included a lot of letters because they had to hit a lot of different points. So 2 letters were for memberships, 2 letters were for judge roles, 3 letters were for 3 very different leading roles. 1 was for original contribution. So there was a method to how we selected them. We didn't just say this person should have 10 references. We said this needs to be proven. Who can actually provide the testimony to prove it? And that's why we did 10 in that case. But yeah, I wouldn't target that many. I think at a certain point, everything kind of muddles together unless they're giving really unique perspectives and unique evidence.
So Jason asks, are only 3 letters required?
There's no letters required. You can file any of these cases without any letters at all. I will say if you're claiming critical or leading role in EB-1A, USCIS will expect a letter. So definitely do at least 1 letter in that case. But there are definitely EB-1As that I've seen approved with no letters, NIWs approved no letters, O-1s approved no letters. Letters are not required. I'm giving the general guidance that you should get those 3 core letters, the employer letter, the academic letter, and the independent letter. But that is general guidance. So take it as you will. Customize it for your case. Talk with your attorneys about how you're going to use that advice. It's not a hardline rule or requirement.
So Ria asks, I was a tutor back in my experience and even got awarded for the same. Does that count as a form of recognition? The school is international?
So it does depend on what case type you're talking here. I can see that factoring into EB-2 and NIW, depending on what your proposed endeavor is. So that would be more like personal advice, but it probably will not work in the EB-1A context. USCIS doesn't generally favor activities that are focused solely on students. They want to see that you are interacting with other top professionals in the field.
Shraven asks, I am a senior software engineer and can I get an independent letter from senior VP at a big financial company? Does that look good for NIW?
Yes, it does look good for NIW, and it sounds like it would be good to get. Yes. Independent letters often do come from industry sources. They can be academic letters, so some people will actually combine the academic and independent letter into one. Some people will have a personal academic letter and then an independent academic letter, but a lot of people will get their independent letters from industry. And having someone with a high-level title at a big institution definitely can be good for the case.
Sujay asks, newly changed job, hard to get reference letter as one may be too new. How much of a deal breaker is this?
It's not a deal breaker. If it's an EB-2 NIW that's more future focused, I would still get a letter from them talking about how your work is expected to impact the company and the industry. But if it's an EB-1A case or an O-1 case, I wouldn't bother with getting a letter most of the time from the new employer because you're documenting your past accomplishments and your reputation. So I would get a letter actually from your past employer that documents all of those things.
Academic reference letters can be former professors who taught us multiple courses.
Yes, they can. So it's not counting as independent if they actually taught you the course, but they can provide really strong academic references and a lot of unique perspective on the field in general. So they are good letters.
If I receive appreciation letters from industry experts for my conference presentations, will this suffice for EB-1A letters of recommendation? These are not addressed to USCIS and only talk about impact of my session or paper on the industry.
They can be good. I think I would be asking why they exist if they're not addressed to USCIS and not appearing to be for the EB-1A. A lot of times, though, I'll just do emails. Like if you give a good presentation and someone emails you about it after the fact, just print the email. You don't really need a letter in that case. these kinds of letters are not necessarily full reference letters anyways. They're not recommending you for this type of immigration benefit. They're not doing an analysis of your career. They're just talking about one single specific thing. And oftentimes I think it's weird when there's a letter doing that, unless it's clear that there needs to be a letter doing that. Just submit emails in that case.
Mohammed asks, working in a government agency full-time temp as a software programmer does make any impact on NIW?
That I think would need a full case analysis. It's not standing out to me as a super strong case right now, just given current trends, but it might be worth talking about and looking at. It depends on what kind of impact you're making and what your future plans are.
Lasana asks, can you talk about the cost and fees from the beginning until end?
Let's not do that on the live stream, but definitely contact me over email if you want the fee structure. I also do post the fees publicly for major case types on my website. So if you go to the services page, you can look and see what it costs.
Jason asks, what are the other requirements for the O-1?
I think it's too broad. If you want to ask a more specific question, that would be fine.
Abhishek asks, is there a template or format we need to follow to request these different types of letters?
There's not a specific template or format, and every law firm kind of does theirs differently, but there are some key components that are needed. So first, the expert has to lay out why they are qualified to provide the opinion. So they do have to talk about themselves in the letter, in addition to talking about you. The letters also need to contain some kind of detailed, substantive information. They can't just be flowery praise about you or your work ethic. They need to talk about what you've done and what your accomplishments are. And then if they're talking about your future as well, they need to be more concrete about it and actually bring in some real world details. They also need to be signed, and it needs to be clear who is signing them. So having a signature block is important. Also, USCIS has been very weird about adding contact information to the letters. They're applying some obscure part of the law about employment verification letters to reference letters. So a lot of times USCIS officers now say that all reference letters must have a physical address on them, which is extremely silly. But make sure, I think that each letter has phone, email, and address on it. It's just going to be better for you if those formalities are included. I would also say it's better if the letters are on letterhead. Not required, of course, but better.
Faisal asks, I have 2 MBAs, one in management, South Korea 2019, and another in supply chain management, USA 2023. I have 3 years of experience as an assistant accountant and 2 years as assistant manager in international market development. I also have 2 publications with 5 citations. Could you evaluate my profile for EB-2 and NIW approval? Thank you.
So we can't do full profile evaluations on the live streams. I do offer the free assessment tool on the website, so please submit your free assessment if you would like a full evaluation. I would say just based on these, it's worth looking at. It's not, again, standing out as a super strong case, but it is standing out as one that's worth looking at. So go ahead and submit the assessment, and then I'll ask you some additional questions.
Does the independent letter have to be on a letterhead? Also, can I get an academic letter from a medical filed professor? I am Stenfield.
So the independent letter doesn't necessarily have to be on letterhead. I do independent letters sometimes for people where it doesn't make sense to get letterhead, but it definitely helps, and it is to some degree expected. So I would push for it. Yes, you can get an independent academic letter from a medical field professor. And it doesn't matter that you are in STEM or in industry. Getting that kind of professor letter does add to the case. I do need to go in just a couple of minutes, so if we can answer the questions that are here, that would be great.
appreciation letters from industry experts. Is this meant to be from conference committee titled recognition for conference contributions, but letters do talk about specific impact? I have email appreciation from fellow attendees as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, these letters would add. I don't know that I would tag them as reference letters in the file. I may tag them differently just as supporting evidence for the conference. But they will add to the overall record and are generally good.
For O-1A, can some STEM experience from the past, which has helped the company achieve international exposure at a high level in research, be used for O-1 application currently? How can I prove my work? Would experience letter help from previous employer?
Yes, you can claim this. And yes, an experience letter from your previous employer outlining your duties, outlining your accomplishments, and then putting everything into context for why it's important for the company and for the industry would be valuable.
Letters of recommendation. Will the work be attached business card that has all contact information? This is for cases where companies restrict letterhead usage.
Sometimes I'll do the business card. Usually I'll just do a CV that shows that they work there. Sometimes I'll do both. Sometimes I'll even do media reports about the person. I'll attach all kinds of supplementary evidence to show the weight of the person's credentials. But yeah, it's not a hardline requirement. All right, 2 more questions.
What can be defined as a super strong case for EB-2 NIW?
If you are a top professor or a PI and you have hundreds of publications, hundreds of citations, judge and do all of these things, essentially if you're qualified for EB-1A, but maybe it's considered to be a slightly weaker EB-1A case, then yeah, that's a strong EB-2 NIW. Everything else just falls into tiers underneath that.
Last question, can we request these letters from our clients?
Yes, I do have people in EB-1A, O-1, and NIW often submit client letters. Client letters are super valuable because they are usually on letterhead from companies that are out in the industry, and they can function as independent verification that the person's work has truly been impactful. So client letters can be good. Keep in mind your employer might have policies on requesting those types of client letters, so be careful with it, but they are valuable additions to the file when you can get them.
Great. That was the last question. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.